The Man on the Lonely Road. In 1993, on a chilly autumn night in rural Austria, Maximilian and his girlfriend, Helena, decided to drive to a small cinema located several kilometers away from their town. Both university students, they often chose simple dates like this to save money. The cinema was situated near a sparse forest, and the road home took them along a narrow path surrounded by empty fields. The movie ended close to midnight. Maximilian drove his old Volkswagen back, chatting with Helena about the film's intriguing details. That night, the sky was moonless, with only faint starlight illuminating the darkness. The countryside was eerily quiet, with the car's headlights slicing through the inky blackness as their sole source of light. As they approached a sharp bend in the road, Maximilian suddenly spotted a man standing ahead. The man, wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a red baseball cap, stood motionless in the middle of the road. "Max, look out!" Helena screamed. Maximilian slammed on the brakes, but the car couldn't stop in time. The car plowed straight toward the man. Maximilian shut his eyes tightly, bracing for the impact. Yet, instead of the crash he expected, he only felt a chilling draft sweeping through him. When he opened his eyes, the man was gone. Helena gasped, clutching her seat. "Max, where is he?" Maximilian shook his head, trying to stay calm. I don't know. Maybe he moved aside at the last second, but deep down, he knew that wasn't possible. Inside the car, the temperature dropped unnaturally, as if winter had suddenly arrived. The headlights dimmed, and the engine began to stutter. The car shuddered, seemingly on the verge of dying. Maximilian pressed on, driving home as quickly as he could. Once they arrived, they sat in the car in silence for a long time, neither daring to speak. The next day, Helena recounted the incident with trembling words. "Max, I'm certain we hit him. I saw the car crash into him, but he just vanished. That wasn't a normal person." Maximilian didn't know how to respond. He told himself that maybe it was just their imagination after a long, tiring night. But when he returned to the road later that afternoon, everything appeared normal. There was no blood, no evidence of an accident, nothing at all. Still, from that day on, both Maximilian and Helena were plagued by unease. At night, they often woke up startled from strange dreams. Maximilian dreamt of driving down that same dark road, only to find the man waiting for him at the end, staring at him with hollow, lifeless eyes. Maximilian decided to share the incident with a colleague at the cafe where he worked part-time. Upon hearing the story, his colleague, Anton, a local, turned pale. "You're not the first to encounter this," Anton said gravely. "That road has seen countless accidents over the years. Back in 1978, a man was hit by a truck at that very bend. He was wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a red baseball cap, just like you described." Anton explained that the man had been a construction worker heading home when the accident occurred. The truck driver fled the scene and was never caught. Since then, several drivers had reported seeing the same man on the road, often resulting in sudden braking or swerving, leading to more accidents. Some even claimed the man walked straight through their cars before vanishing. After that fateful night, Helena began to feel as though she was being watched whenever she passed by that stretch of road. Once, while walking in her garden late at night, she heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind her. But when she turned around, there was no one there. Maximilian wasn't spared either. One evening, while driving alone past the bend, he felt the steering wheel grow unnaturally heavy, as if someone else were trying to control the car. The worst moment came one night when Maximilian woke suddenly and looked out his window. Across the street, Standing in the shadows was a figure wearing a red baseball cap. But when he turned on the light to get a better look, the figure had vanished. Maximilian wasn't a superstitious man, but the strange events forced him to rethink. He visited the local library to research the road's history. Through old newspapers, Maximilian learned that the man who died in 1978 had left behind a grieving family, unable to find justice for his death. They believed his spirit remained tethered to the site of his tragic accident, waiting for someone to help him move on. One night, Maximilian decided to confront his fears, driving alone to the haunted stretch of road. He parked his car at the spot where he had first seen the man and turned off the engine. The air was cold and eerily still. Maximilian felt a heavy presence surrounding him, though his eyes could see nothing but darkness. "What do you want from me?" Maximilian shouted into the emptiness, his voice echoing across the fields. A sudden gust of icy wind blew through, and for a brief moment, Maximilian saw a faint silhouette standing in front of him. It was the man in the white t-shirt, staring at him with empty eyes. Maximilian froze, unable to move. Yet, in the man's gaze, he didn't see anger, but a deep, profound sadness. The figure gradually dissolved into thin air, leaving Maximilian standing alone with his racing heart. After that night, Maximilian never encountered the man again, but every time he drove past that road, he still felt an inexplicable chill, as though the spirit's presence lingered faintly in the air. Helena later admitted she felt as if the ordeal had ended, though the fear never completely left her. Maximilian would never forget the sorrowful look in the man's eyes that night. He wondered if the spirit had finally found peace or if it still haunted the road, silently waiting for a resolution that would never come. Though years have passed, Maximilian holds onto the story as a reminder of the inexplicable mysteries of life. The lonely road in rural Austria is no longer just a road. It's a place where memories of an unresolved tragedy linger, bound to the realm of the unknown. The Haunting of Jane, a paranormal encounter. 7 years ago, I moved into my current home, a modest house nestled in a quiet neighborhood in Salem, Massachusetts. It seemed like the perfect place to start fresh. A picturesque home in a town steeped in history and whispers of the supernatural. Growing up, I always knew I was different. My father's side of the family carried an unusual gift, the ability to see spirits. It wasn't something openly discussed, more of a hushed secret among a select few. But out of all my siblings, I was the only one who inherited this peculiar ability. I never thought much of it until I moved into this house. For years, life here was quiet, even peaceful. If there were spirits lingering in the corners of my home, they remained invisible. That is, until 2 years ago, when everything changed. It was a chilly autumn night when I first met her. I had gone to bed early, wrapped in the warmth of my blanket, with Barbie, my small Maltese dog, curled up beside me as she always did. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of wooden beams settling. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to an odd sensation, a light pressure on my shin, like a child's hand resting there. At first, I assumed it was Barbie moving around, but when I glanced at her, she was wide awake, sitting alert and staring at the foot of the bed. Then I saw her. A little girl with long, dark brown hair sat at the edge of my bed. She was no older than 7, her petite frame draped in a simple white dress. She didn't seem threatening, just sad. She stared out the window above my bed, her small body completely still. I blinked, unsure if I was still dreaming, "Barbara," I murmured, mistaking her for my 5-year-old sister who occasionally stayed over. The girl turned to me slowly, her golden brown eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. But as she faced me, I realized she wasn't Barbara. Her face was incomplete. She had no mouth, only a faint outline where her lips should have been, and her nose was barely more than a shadow of its form. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. Her gaze bore into me, unblinking, like a deer caught in headlights, and then a single word surfaced in my mind: suffocate. I don't know why, but I instinctively called her Jane. The name felt right, as if she had whispered it to me without speaking. Jane didn't hurt me that night. Instead, she simply watched me, her sadness palpable. Sometimes, she would crawl onto my lap and cry soundlessly. Other nights, she would sit at the foot of my bed, staring out the window as if waiting for someone who never came. Barbie reacted oddly to her presence, my usually protective dog, who barked at the slightest noise, would either leave the room entirely or sit quietly at my side. Her ears perked but not aggressive. Over time, Jane's visits became routine. She appeared every few nights, her sorrowful energy filling the room. I began asking her questions, hoping to understand who she was or what she needed. She tried to respond, but without a mouth. Her communication was limited to gestures and expressions. Sometimes she would grow frustrated and disappear, only to return days or weeks later. One evening, during a casual family dinner, my father surprised me by mentioning Jane. "You've seen her too?" I asked, shocked. He nodded solemnly. "She wanders around the house, usually near the stairs. I've caught glimpses of her reflection in mirrors. She's harmless, but she carries a heavy sadness." His confirmation both comforted and unsettled me. Jane wasn't a figment of my imagination. She was real, and her pain was tangible. A month after her last appearance, Jane returned, but this time she was different. She seemed frantic, her movements jittery and erratic. She climbed into my bed, clutching my hand tightly with her icy, translucent fingers. Her golden eyes were wide with fear, darting toward the door as if something or someone was chasing her. I didn't know how to help her, so I simply held her hand until she calmed down. Eventually, she curled up beside me, and I fell asleep with her ghostly presence lingering at my side. Determined to uncover Jane's story, I began researching my home's history. What I found sent shivers down my spine. In the early 1900s, the house had belonged to a family with 3 children. The youngest, a 7-year-old girl named Jane, had tragically died in her bedroom. According to old newspaper clippings, she had accidentally suffocated during the night. The details were vague, but the cause of death was attributed to an improperly ventilated gas heater. Her death had left a scar on the family, and they moved away shortly after. As I delved deeper into Jane's story, the paranormal activity in my home intensified. Doors creaked open on their own. Cold drafts swept through the house even when the windows were shut, and faint, muffled cries echoed through the halls late at night. Once, while sitting in the living room, I caught a glimpse of Jane's reflection in the television screen. She stood behind me, her golden eyes filled with longing. When I turned, she was gone. Another night, I woke to find small handprints on the steamed-up bathroom mirror. Though I lived alone, one night, Jane appeared again, her eyes filled with urgency. This time, she pointed toward the closet in my bedroom. Though hesitant, I opened it and found an old, dusty wooden box hidden in the corner. Inside were faded photographs of a family, Jane's family. In one photo, Jane stood smiling with her parents and siblings. It was the first time I'd seen her face complete. Her lips curved into a shy smile. Seeing her like this made her presence feel more human, more real. I knew I had to help Jane find peace. I contacted a local historian who specialized in Salem's haunted past. Together, we arranged a small memorial for Jane, placing her photograph and a bouquet of white lilies, a symbol of purity and remembrance, at the base of the large oak tree in my backyard. That night, Jane visited me one last time. She stood at the foot of my bed, her incomplete face replaced with the smile I had seen in the photograph. Her golden eyes shimmered with gratitude, and for the first time, I felt a sense of warmth from her presence. She reached out, her icy fingers brushing against mine before she faded into the soft glow of the moonlight. Since that night, Jane has not returned. The house feels lighter now, as if a burden has been lifted. Barbie, once wary of the ghostly presence, sleeps soundly at my feet without a care in the world. Though I miss Jane in a strange way, I'm grateful to have been part of her journey. Her story reminds me that the veil between our world and the next is thin, and that sometimes spirits linger not out of malice, but out of a need for connection and closure. Jane's presence may be gone, but her memory lingers in my heart, a haunting reminder of the lives that existed before us and the stories they leave behind. My hospital roommate. My life turned upside down when I was diagnosed with severe pneumonia. It was the beginning of winter, the cold air biting through my lungs, making every breath a struggle. After weeks of enduring the symptoms, I finally had to be admitted to the hospital. The facility I went to was located in the outskirts of a small city in northern China, a place known for its long, harsh winters. They assigned me to room 105, a simple two-person room. When I arrived, it was empty. There were no other patients. At least I'll have some peace and quiet, I thought, as I wasn't fond of noise or crowds. Room 105 was located at the end of the hallway on the third floor, where sunlight barely reached through a small, frosted window. The atmosphere was cold, partly due to the weather and partly because of its shadowy position. Though I didn't want to admit it, something about the room made me feel uneasy, but I reassured myself that it was just my weakened state playing tricks on me. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time sleeping or staring out the window, watching the silent snowfall, but that tranquility didn't last long. One night, I woke up abruptly without knowing why. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of a bedside lamp casting shadows on the walls. First, I didn't notice anything unusual until I turned my gaze to the bed opposite mine. Someone was lying there. It was an older man, probably in his 50s, with a thin, gaunt frame and pale skin. He wore the standard light blue hospital gown, but what caught my attention were faint red stains on his shirt. Noticing I was awake, he smiled weakly. "Hello," he said, his voice calm but hoarse. "I'm Wong. I was just transferred here after a car accident. Broke a few bones, but I'm lucky to be alive." I tried to respond, but my voice was too weak from the pneumonia, so I could only mumble a few sounds. Despite this, I felt oddly comforted by his presence. Mr. Wong talked a lot, mostly about his accident and how he lived alone without anyone to take care of him. But from the very beginning, something about him felt off. Mr. Wong mentioned that his injuries were severe, yet I noticed he moved around with surprising ease. Despite claiming to have broken bones, he walked briskly, his movements quick and precise. Another strange thing was that every morning at 8 a.m., when the doctors and nurses came to check on me, Mr. Wong was never in the room. I assumed he went out for tests or examinations, but no one ever mentioned him or called his name. One day, I asked a nurse about him. She gave me a puzzled look and said, "This room is for one patient only. You're the only one here." Her words sent a chill down my spine. After that, I became more observant. Mr. Wong only appeared at night when I was alone. Each time he arrived, the air in the room grew colder, heavier. One night, I asked him, "Don't you feel any pain? You said your injuries were severe, yet you move so easily." He looked out the window, his expression distant. After a long pause, he replied, "Pain doesn't matter anymore." His answer sent shivers down my spine. From that night onward, I couldn't sleep deeply. I lay on my side, peeking through the gap in my blanket, watching him. Once, I saw him standing in the corner of the room, staring silently out the window. His gaze seemed to be searching for something or someone, but I couldn't figure out what. During our nightly conversations, Mr. Wong shared more about his life. He told me he had once been part of a happy family, but that his wife and son had long since left him. "They don't need me anymore," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. I noticed his eyes often reflected a deep sadness. Whenever I tried to ask more about his family, he would fall silent and avoid answering. I started suspecting that Mr. Wong wasn't an ordinary person. One day, when my family came to visit, I tried telling them about my peculiar roommate. They laughed it off, saying I was probably imagining things due to fatigue or medication side effects. Determined to prove his existence, I decided to secretly take a picture of him one night while he sat on his bed. But when I checked the photo, his bed was completely empty. That night, I didn't dare close my eyes. Finally, the day of my discharge arrived. Before I left, Mr. Wong approached me and asked if we could take a picture together as a keepsake. I hesitated but eventually agreed, thinking it was a harmless request. We stood side by side in the room, and I used my phone to take the photo. In it, he smiled faintly, a sad smile, as though he knew this was goodbye. After completing my discharge paperwork, I went to the reception desk to finalize some details. While waiting, I noticed a young man standing nearby, talking to one of the staff. He looked familiar. His features bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Wong, only much younger. Curious, I called out, "Mr. Wong, is that you?" The young man turned to me, confused. "Are you talking to me? I think you've mistaken me for someone else." I approached him, puzzled. "Aren't you with Mr. Wong? He was my roommate in room 105. The young man's face changed. "I don't know what you're talking about. My father was Mr. Wong, but he passed away 2 weeks ago in a car accident. I'm here to handle some paperwork for him." His words left me stunned. I returned home, my mind racing with everything that had happened, unable to shake the unease. I opened my phone to look at the picture I had taken with Mr. Wong. In the photo, I stood alone. The space beside me, where Mr. Wong had been, was empty. He wasn't there. 2 months in room 105 had led to an encounter I couldn't explain. Even after leaving the hospital, the memory of Mr. Wong haunted me. The empty photo on my phone remained as the only evidence of the mysterious man who had been both my roommate and my companion during those lonely days. Was Mr. Wong a lost spirit, lingering in the hospital where his life had ended? Or had my illness and isolation caused me to imagine it all? I'll never know. But one thing is certain. Room 105 is no ordinary hospital room, and the memory of Mr. Wong will stay with me for the rest of my life. The Whisper in the Snow, a paranormal tale. It was the beginning of summer break. the first after an exhausting semester at college. My parents, in an unusually generous mood, gave me permission to go on a road trip with my friends. This was an adventure we'd planned for months, a trip through the beautiful but remote regions of Montana. Our ride was a 7-seater SUV, packed with snacks, blankets, and endless excitement. There were 6 of us in total, including our driver, Caleb, a college buddy who prided himself on his road trip playlists. Mark sat in the back seat with Julia, my closest friend since high school, and James, who constantly cracked jokes that barely landed. Up front were Caleb, Nicole, who always brought the vibes, and Elena, a quiet yet curious soul. The morning of our departure wasn't exactly picturesque. The sky was gray, snow flurries swirled in the air, and a biting chill seeped through even our warmest jackets. But our spirits were high as we set off, eager for the adventure ahead. The road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by dense forests and deep valleys blanketed in snow. As we ventured further from civilization, our phones lost signal, leaving us disconnected from the outside world. Despite the eerie quiet of the wilderness, the SUV buzzed with laughter, music, and chatter. We sang along to old songs, swapped stories, and teased one another. Caleb, as usual, kept the energy up with his eccentric DJ skills. But the merriment didn't last long. As we entered a particularly desolate stretch of road, something changed. The air grew heavier, colder. The trees, once vibrant even in winter's embrace, seemed to loom closer, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. A sudden, blood-curdling scream from Nicole jolted us out of our revelry. Caleb swerved violently, and the car veered off the road. A massive, ghostly white figure loomed before us, encompassing the vehicle like a shroud. Everything went dark. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the acrid smell of smoke. My head throbbed as I opened my eyes, my vision blurry. The SUV was in shambles, its front end wrapped around a tree. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the shattered windows, landing on the dashboard. I looked around, dazed. My friends were stirring, groaning in pain but thankfully alive. Caleb's face was pale as he gripped the steering wheel, muttering incoherently. It was then I remembered the shadow, that enormous, pale figure that seemed to swallow us whole. But as I tried to piece together what had happened, darkness claimed me again. I woke up in a sterile white hospital room, the sound of beeping monitors and the faint murmur of voices filling the air. My parents were by my side, their faces etched with worry. The doctors told me we had been lucky. No one had sustained life-threatening injuries despite the severity of the crash. After a week in the hospital, I was cleared to go home. For a while, life returned to normal. The memory of the accident faded. The shadow I had seen dismissed as a trick of the mind in a moment of panic. But then the dreams began. First, it was subtle, a shadowy figure appearing in my dreams, standing at the edge of my vision. Each time it grew closer, this form clearer, a towering white shape, faceless yet menacing. One night, I woke with a start, my room freezing cold despite the warm summer air. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. There. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the whispers followed me. I heard them when I was alone in the kitchen, in the hallway late at night, even in broad daylight. My appetite waned, and I lost several pounds in just a few weeks. Desperate for answers, I confided in my friends. Julia, always the pragmatist, suggested we revisit the crash site. Maybe, she reasoned, Confronting the place where it all began would help put my mind at ease. Surprisingly, everyone agreed. A week later, we packed into Caleb's replacement SUV and retraced our steps to the remote stretch of road where the accident had occurred. The air was thick with tension as we approached the spot. We parked near the edge of the valley, and the six of us climbed down the snowy slope to the area below. It was there, hidden among the trees, that we saw it. A rusted car, half buried in snow and dirt, sat eerily silent at the bottom of the valley. Its windows were shattered, the paint faded and peeling. From the condition of the vehicle, it had clearly been there for decades. Heart pounding, I moved closer, brushing away snow from the side of the car. The sight made my stomach churn. A skeletal hand rested on the steering wheel. Elena gasped, stepping back as Nicole let out a muffled scream. Caleb called the authorities, and soon the quiet valley was filled with flashing lights and the murmur of police officers. The police investigation revealed that the car belonged to a man who had disappeared nearly 40 years ago. According to old reports, he had gone missing during a snowstorm while driving through the area. The officers speculated that he had swerved off the road, much like we had, but with no one to find him. He had succumbed to the elements. His remains had been trapped in the car ever since, lost to time and nature. As we watched the scene unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure I had seen, the shadow that haunted my dreams, was somehow connected to this man. After returning home, I hoped the discovery of the car would bring me closure, but the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, more insistent. The figure appeared not just in my dreams, but in the corners of my vision, in mirrors, and in the shadows of my home. There. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A plea for help? Or something far darker? To this day, the events of that summer remain a mystery. The whispers still haunt me, and the shadowy figure continues to loom, a constant reminder of that snowy road and the secrets it revealed. I've tried to move on, but deep down, I know this is far from over. Whatever is out there, whatever is tethered to me, is waiting. For what? I don't know, and that's what terrifies me most. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight, exploring these mysterious and spine-chilling stories. If these tales have sparked your curiosity or left you with unforgettable feelings, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had similar paranormal experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to send your story to the email address provided in the description. Who knows? Your story might become part of our journey into the spiritual world in a future episode. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our haunting tales. See you in the next episode, and remember, always keep a light by your side.